Hey there, lovely. If you're a driven and highly ambitious woman who has checked all the boxes, followed all the rules, only to realize you don't actually feel fulfilled or you don't feel like you're living your purpose, then you are absolutely in the right place. My name is Melissa Chavis. I'm an intuitive mindset coach, and I am absolutely obsessed with helping you discover your true purpose, that thing you were put here on this earth to do, so that you can live the most fulfilling and abundant life possible.
Hey there, beautiful. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Awakening podcast. Today, I want to talk about a topic that has been coming up for me lately, coming up in conversation around me, and I think is really, really relevant for those of us who are trying to create a new reality for ourselves. I want to talk about how difficult it can be to let go of the persona that we have built up for ourselves over the last 30, 40 years, depending on when you're getting into this kind of work. A lot of the work that I do with my clients centers around building new belief systems and finding their most authentic, truest version of themselves so that they can live life in that way moving forward. But we wouldn't be doing this type of work, we wouldn't be leaning into this kind of transformation if we didn't feel like something was off in our current lives to begin with. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't feel like there was some misalignment in our lives that we needed to correct. So you've probably spent most of your life building up your current persona, this identity that you show up in on a day-to-day basis. And that has been your identity for probably many, many years. And that essentially amounts to decades of programming your brain to think, act, behave, show up in this way as this person that you have become. And for the majority of us, for most of our lives, this is just who we are. If you asked, okay, who are you? What are some, fun facts about you? You would describe this persona that you've been living as for most of your life. That is who you are. That is what you like. That's how you think. That's how you behave. That's how you show up in your day-to-day life. But when you get to the point where you're doing this work to transform your life so that you can live ultimately as this different version of you, this truer, more authentic, more aligned version of you, then you realize at that point that this persona that you've taken on throughout your life isn't really true to you, isn't really who you are at your core. That's the reason that you are doing this work, to align yourself more with who you are deep inside, with who you are authentically. But when you make this decision to create a new reality for yourself and change the way that you show up in your life and change the way that you think about the world around you and the way that you think about yourself, the way you see yourself, when you make that decision to move forward with doing that work, it can still be hard as hell to let go of the persona that you've been carrying with you for your entire life up to this point. And when I say persona, I mean the belief systems, the thoughts, the way you interact with people around you, the way you react to certain situations. Ultimately, it's the programming that has been created inside your brain to help you show up in this certain way on a day-to-day basis in your daily life. And it probably feels very natural to you to show up in this way, the way that you've always shown up, the person you've always been, this version of you that everybody around you knows as you, right? It's easy. It's easy at this point. You're an adult. You've gotten to this point in your life where these beliefs and behaviors and thoughts are so ingrained in you that it's truly just automatic. It's like living your life on autopilot just leads to this version of you showing up in front of everybody. But you've made this decision that it's not going to happen anymore. That you're going to show up as a more authentic version of you. That you're going to show up and live your life based on these new beliefs that you're building about yourself and about the world around you and about how you want to live your life. But it can be so hard to let go of this version of you that has been the real you for so many years. So the way that our brain works in sort of the simplest explanation of how it works is your brain takes in whatever input from the outside world, whatever situation you see around you, whatever someone says, whatever the circumstance is that is in your reality at this moment. Your brain takes it in and then uses this programming that's been programmed in there over the years to quickly figure out what is a typical response to this external situation. How do I typically behave in this situation? How do I typically respond to this situation? What do I do when someone says these things to me? And then it quickly spits out the response, the answer to that question of how do I respond to this, right? Uses the programming that's been in there, the set of beliefs, the way you think about things, the world around you, yourself, this other individual, and it automatically spits out a response for you. And for the most part, we just do the thing or we say the thing, and it's completely automatic. It's completely autopilot. Like we don't have to really think about it, process it, figure out how we're going to respond, figure out what we're going to say. It happens in a split second and it just happens. And then we can look back on it later and say, okay, so this is what happened. And then this is what I kind of thought about it. This is how I responded. And we can reflect on that and try to figure out why it happened that way. But in the moment, for the most part, we're not really actively thinking about it. And the reason that our brain works that way is because your brain uses about 30% of your energy intake on a daily basis. So the energy that you're using up to just live and be a human being, like 30% of it goes just to your brain. And so your brain is always trying its best to be as efficient as possible. And working on this sort of automatic programming that's in there is efficient. It's very efficient. Can you imagine if, and I've talked about this before, the example of driving and how after so many years, it becomes very automatic for most of us. And we get in a car, we turn it on, we put it in drive, and we just drive very automatically. Our body just knows what to do. Our brain knows what to do given various situations. We know what we're looking out for. We've got this certain awareness about us that will help us figure out how to get to where we're going. But it's just very, very automatic. So can you imagine if every time you went to go do anything, you had to actively think about it? Like if you can remember back to when you learned how to drive, it took a lot of effort. It really did. It was like, okay, I get in the car and now I need to, adjust my mirrors and figure out, adjust my seat, make sure everything's right. Okay, I need to turn the key and turn it on. Okay, foot on the brake. Okay, make sure that I put it in drive. And you literally had to think through every single step of it, which wasn't very efficient. It took a lot more time and a lot more effort to do it that way. So it makes sense that over time, as humans, we repeat certain patterns, we repeat certain thoughts, we repeat certain beliefs throughout our lives, and they get repeated back to us. And so our brain is like, okay, let's make this much more efficient. Let's just put this programming in there so that every time, something comes up, we just kind of automatically know how to respond. So it makes sense. But when you're actively trying to change the way that you think about things and the way that you see yourself and the world around you, the way you behave, the way you show up, it can be really, really difficult to get off of autopilot and to be much more intentional and conscious of the way that you're thinking about things and seeing things literally every minute of every day. Because in order to change those beliefs, in order to change the automatic thought patterns that happen, you need to be aware of what you're actually thinking or how you're feeling in any given situation, and then make an assessment and make a conscious decision about how you're going to move forward in that situation. So it's very effortful, and it can feel very, very difficult to not just allow yourself to go back into autopilot and start thinking the same way, following those same patterns day in and day out. And essentially, even the idea of showing up differently to the people around you can be really difficult, right? When friends or family or the people in your life sort of expect you to show up in this certain way, they know what to expect in any given situation with you, and then all of a sudden it's different. All of a sudden they're seeing a different version of you. It can be a little unsettling for them. They can feel like they don't know what to expect because in our lives, we just sort of end up living in this state of autopilot and sort of just knowing how things are going to work in any given situation, especially in relationships with the people around us. And when those things start to look different or work differently, it's very unsettling. It's very off-putting. And so even just conceptualizing showing up differently, thinking about how you're going to show up differently and the people around you are going to think different thoughts about you maybe, or see you a little bit differently. And that can be really challenging in and of itself. So there's that aspect of it as well. But the most challenging piece is to not let yourself drift back to these old patterns, beliefs, way of behaving and showing up in the world. Because it's really, really easy to just let yourself sort of glide back into it. It's sort of like, and I've used this analogy before as well, the worn tire ruts on an old dirt road. It's like there are just these ruts in the road because the cars go same direction in and out day after day, right? And if you're trying to all of a sudden pull your car out of those ruts, it can be really, really difficult. It's really, really easy to just slide back into them because that's where everybody's been traveling day after day. That's the natural path that's been carved there. And it's the same thing with your brain. It's the same thing in life. It's really easy to just drift back in. And especially what I've noticed in my life is if someone gets sick or you just have a lot going on that week, or, life just feels more challenging for whatever reason for an extended period of time, it becomes much easier for me to fall back into old patterns. It just becomes, it's hard for me to put as much effort into continuing to move forward on the path that I've been trying to move forward on in my life. And it just becomes easier, more comfortable to kind of fall back into my old ways. And then eventually you realize this. You realize, oh, I've gotten off track. I need to come back to this. I need to recommit. I need to put that effort in again just to get back to where I even was. And it's almost like this 2 steps forward, 1 step back process that can happen because it's just so easy to go back to the way things were, to drift back into these old patterns. But I actually thought of this story from probably 12 years ago at this point. As I was thinking about this idea and thinking about this whole process of having to let go of this persona and let go of all of the beliefs and thoughts and actions that fall in line with that persona that I had created for myself throughout my whole life up into adulthood, well into adulthood. But I thought of this story. This was pre-kids. I was an avid yoga practitioner. I would probably attend, I would say, at least 2 classes a week. I had a favorite studio that I would go to regularly, but I also kind of went to various studios in the area too. And so I was a regular yoga practitioner. And at some point, I decided to try out a new class at my regular yoga studio, probably just like a different day that I didn't usually go. This new class. And so I go in and I meet this instructor I've never met before. And he's this big, probably 6'3" guy. And I walk in and I'm like, oh, okay, that's just not what I'm used to. That's outside of my norm, right? So it felt a little uncomfortable because it wasn't what I was used to. But as we get into the practice and we're going through all of the different poses, he starts coming around the room and doing manual adjustments on each of the students in the class. And I'm sure he was asking permission and doing it all the way that it needs to be done. But it still felt kind of uncomfortable in the moment to be in that situation of like, oh, someone's telling me I need to do this differently, essentially. But as he comes around the room and he makes some adjustments to me physically in this pose, I realize, oh my gosh, now I know what it feels like in my body to be in the correct alignment in this yoga pose. Up until now, I haven't been doing it correctly. I've been trying and I've been moving toward this, but now I know exactly what it feels like in my body when I am in correct alignment. And so I realized that's incredibly valuable to understand and feel and know how to do all of these poses with proper alignment, because not only are you then avoiding any potential injuries from doing them improperly, but you're getting the most benefit out of yoga if you're doing it properly, right? So I ended up making that a regular class that I attended week after week. I would attend that class. And even years later, when I do practice yoga, even today, I know what it feels like in my body to be in proper alignment for each pose. And that's so incredibly helpful in moving through a yoga practice. But as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, yeah, I had to come back to it week after week and sort of get these adjustments and like get an adjustment here, get an adjustment here, so that eventually my entire practice was much more aligned. I can go through an entire yoga class at this point and have proper alignment for each of the poses. But it took week after week after week coming back to it and making these minor adjustments to get through sort of the entire practice, to get through every pose, to understand what it all feels like in my body, until eventually it feels very natural for me and I just know what I'm doing as I go through the poses. But it took time, it took consistent practice, And it took coming back to it on a regular basis. And as I was thinking about all of this, I realized that that is exactly what it's like to be inside my one-on-one coaching program. Because one of the things that I'm doing for my clients is I'm bringing them back to this week after week. I'm bringing them back to what it feels like to be in that alignment. I'm reminding them, I'm showing them over and over again. And we're tweaking, various areas because it's like, okay, I think I have this part on track. I'm able to do these things now, but there's this other area over here where I'm struggling now. And so we work on that area. And so over time, coming back to this on a consistent basis and practicing this, it really helps to avoid the drift that can so naturally and easily happen in our lives. That drifting back into this old persona that we're actively trying to let go of. It requires coming back to the practice of becoming this different version of you week after week after week until you are just naturally showing up in your life as this version until you've fully created this reality that you've been trying so hard to create for yourself. So hopefully that was all helpful for you today. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I'm at Melissa Ann Chavis, or just, leave a comment wherever you're listening to this or watching it. Does this resonate for you? Have you noticed in your life how even when you're trying so hard to make these changes, it can be so easy and can just happen like this, that you find yourself falling back into the old patterns, the old belief systems, sort of this old persona and way of showing up in your life with the people around you? Because I know for me, many of the women I've worked with, many of the women I know who have gone through this themselves have felt it challenging at times to let go of that old persona, to really let go of who they thought they were and who the other people around them knew them as. And of course, as always, if you're interested in learning more about what it looks like to work with me inside my one-on-one private mentorship, you can click the link here in the description for an application call, and we can talk about what that looks like. I can answer any questions that you might have and see if it is a good fit for us to work together. Well, I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you here again next week, same time. That's it for another episode of the Authentic Awakening podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you found it helpful, I'd love to hear from you. You can do that by liking and subscribing to my YouTube channel or rating and reviewing the podcast wherever you're listening.